Hello and welcome to another Wolf Time gaming video. Today we're heading back to the realms of fantasy, specifically fantasy football in the form of Blood Bowl. That's right, I've finally cracked open the box and built some of those absolutely fantastic looking minis. And what better to start with than those in the centre of the game, the referees. So on the left there we've got the dwarf referee and we've got an elf as well. And I'm going to give those guys a really nice cool looking paint scheme. I'm going to play around with the paints a little bit and see what we can do. Before we get started though, as usual, let's get that kettle on. Okay, so as usual, the first thing you want to do is give it a really nice base coat. You can see I've already added some fine sand just to the base there, so I don't need to mess around with basic materials a little later. I can just pop some paint straight on them. So once you've got it built, give it a really good base coat. I've gone with Contrast Grey Sear, the spray in this instance, purely so I can use some of those amazing contrast paints on this mini. I think we're going to get it looking really good. Now what I'll do, I'll go through painting the actual dwarf, and when there's any differences I'll show you what I've done with the elf as well, because essentially I'm going with a very similar paint scheme for the two. So once we've got the base coat down, the first thing I'm going to do is like the actual faces, and I'm starting with the eyes because it's always the hardest part for me, and I really wanted to get them spot on. So I've started straight away with the eyes, and then I'll add the flesh tone on after. Now the first thing I'm going to do, if you've seen any of my other videos, you'll know I'll paint faces, is I'll grab a little bit of black paint and just paint with a very fine tip brush a line from the centre of the nose outwards to the edge of the eye. And what this does is add the sort of like darker area into the eye, or around the eye, sorry, and then you can go in with a little bit of white paint just for the actual eyeball itself. As you can see there, now I've got a very small tip brush to do this. It is a little bit fiddly, but you know, once you've had some practice with this, it does become quite easy. Now to actually add the colour into the eye, I don't bother with any specific colours because you know you're not going to look that closely at these. So I've just got the exact same black paint. Doesn't matter which one you use. I'm using Contrast Black Templar for this one, just to dot that centre of the eye there to essentially get the actual iris of the eye, and that's the eyes complete, and we can move on to the actual flesh tones. Now I'm going straight on there with Contrast Gulliman Flesh. It's an absolutely fantastic sort of flesh colour. Works really well, especially for you know, the dwarfs and things like that. You don't really need to highlight. I've been using this for pretty much everything I do recently. Using it for Star Wars Legion, using it for 40k, you know, the fantasy miniatures I've been playing with. I've even been playing around with it with some of the anthropomorphic animals from Burrows and Badgers. You can see there the flesh looks absolutely fantastic. Straight on there, leave it to dry for a little while. Now I'm going with another contrast paint now, and this time it's Contrast Skeleton Horde, and that's essentially to do any of the parchment, papers, things like that. The dwarf in particular has got loads of rule books all over him, you know, ready to pull them out to check those rules as the game goes on. And this Skeleton Horde colour, it's like a really light tan colour, works really nicely for the paper. To actually paint the books themselves, I'm going with a really bright red paint for this one. This is another contrast paint called Blood Angels Red. It's a really nice red paint. It's really bright. Stands out fantastically as well. It really does jump from the miniature, especially once you've got them completely painted. You'll see. Be careful not to actually you know, touch any of these areas now though. Once you've got the contrast paint on, it does rub off really quickly and really easily. So if you've got like one of the painting handles or anything like that, definitely worth using. I'm not using it here, as you can see. I'm just using my hand and holding the actual base. Now on some of the leather work on the books, so the bindings have got sort of wrapping around them. I'm going with another contrast paint again, unsurprisingly, and this time it's contrast Wildwood. It's quite a nice sort of medium brown, I would say. It's not too dark, not too light. You don't need to highlight with this because it's a contrast paint as well. It almost does it all for you, and it looks absolutely fantastic. And you can see I've done the edging of some of the smaller books, the leatherwork of the smaller books with the same colour as well. It looks really, really good. Now, to add some of the extra details on here, I've gone with a black paint called Black Templar, which we used earlier for the face. Now I've added that onto the shoes itself, onto his actual boots. So they almost look like football boots, I think. And now what I'm doing is painting essentially his whole shirt, the whole thing, because we're going with that sort of traditional black and white, black and grey sort of striped jersey, very sort of traditional referee looking shirt, but I wanted essentially to start with a complete sort of black base coat across the whole thing, and then add the white in after. While I was waiting for that to dry, I thought I'd go in with the beard on this one. Now, to paint the beard, I've actually got a really, really nice orange paint called Jacaro Orange. I'll pop all the names of these down in the description below just to help you as well, because I know my pronunciation of some of these words, or some of the paint names, sorry, can be a little bit difficult to understand. This one's a really nice one though. I use this for all like sort of redheads and gingers, and you can mix a few different shades with it as well to actually get different sort of looks. I think it looks great though, as it is straight off the bat. But while I'm waiting for that to dry as well, I thought I'd just paint this little bit of a quill here. I've got some of the purple paint called Drucci Violet. That's Druchii. Again, I'll add it down below. It's essentially like a purpley sort of coloured contrast paint. And I thought, you know, the quill wanted to be a bit different, so I thought I'd pop that on there. And before I moved on to the shading and things, I thought I'd do some of the gold painting as well. Specifically around the actual book, you've got quite a nice ornate looking sort of lock on the back of the rule book on his back there, which looks absolutely amazing. And I'm just using a Retributor armour for that gold, and also he's got like sort of the ink pot as well, just attached to the side, just that the quill's stuck in there. I thought I'd add a little bit of gold paint to that as well, just essentially to add all of these base coats down. Grabbed a little bit of silver paint now. It doesn't matter which silver you use. Again, I'm using Leadbelcher because I think it's great. I use Leadbelcher for pretty much everything, and I'm doing the actual sort of padlock itself with the silver paint because I wanted it to stand out a little bit more from the actual ornate lock. I wanted it to look a little bit different, so I went with the silver on that, and there's a few little bits on there as well. Now, to actually start shading some of these blocky colours now, I'm starting with the beard itself, and I'm going in there with a Reikland Flesh shade onto the actual beard. And what this does is add sort of a more of a reddy tinge with the Flesh shade. You could use you know, Agrax shade or anything like that, which is what I'm going in with over the gold with now, and that does work really, really well. But you don't need to. You can add pretty much any sort of shade colour to it, and it does just add a little bit of a tint to it. But I really like the red that it gives on the beard, and the Agrax shade on the gold looks fantastic. This is the first time we're sort of seeing the elf now, and I'm just showing you how I did their hair, because essentially I did it a very different colour than the dwarf. Obviously I've gone with a very red for the dwarf, and I'm going with blonde for the actual elf. And to do that I've used Xandri Dust as the base coat, which I think is a really, really good colour to go with for blonde hair. It's very pale blonde, not too bright. I didn't want it that yellowy blonde. I really dislike that. But I'm essentially using the Xandri Dust there, and then adding a Agrax shade straight over the top. And this does add a little bit of a browny tinge to it. Gives more of a natural sort of a blonde look rather than that, you know, bright yellow hair that you see traditionally with some of these fantasy miniatures. But I really like the look. And it works really, really well, I think. Now, to continue shading the actual dwarf itself, I'm going with a Null Noil just over the metal work there. So all those Leadbelcher bits that we painted earlier, essentially we just pop in a little bit of Null Noil over the top. And what this does is add the shading straight into it. It works really well in the lock as well. The actual lock itself gives it that sort of deep feel, I suppose. Now, this was a little bit more difficult now. One of probably the harder parts of painting these actual miniatures is actually painting the stripes onto the actual jersey. Now, I didn't want to go with white with this because I thought white would be way too bright. So I've actually gone with a really light grey paint called Administratum Grey. And all I'm doing is essentially working my way around the bottom of the shirt initially to add the sort of light areas of bright painting, and then going above the belt, I'm then continuing that stripe essentially, just using a really fine tip brush. Best way I've found of doing this is try and do the sides of the stripe first, if that makes sense, and then filling into the middle, because essentially you want to get it as straight as possible. And if you do mess up, just grab that little bit of black paint afterwards and tidy it up. Again, it's a really quite simple way of doing things, and I'm doing the same, going to do the same thing with the actual elf as well. But before I moved on to that part on the elf, actually, there is a little bit I've just added onto this parchment he's got wrapped around his leg. It's quite a long one. I wanted it looks a bit plain just with the paper, so I wanted to add like a little bit of writing on there, so I grabbed a really fine tip brush, a little bit of contrast black Templar, and essentially all I'm doing is painting squiggles all the way up both sides of the parchment, and it essentially looks like writing then, and it works quite well. I think you know, it's I could have done a little bit better, maybe drawn try to paint the actual words, some words out, but you know, I'm not that artistic when it comes to that sort of thing, but so I think the squiggle works quite well. Moving on to the basing now. The first thing I'm going to do is add a sort of a soil colour, and I'm going with Rhinox hide as the sort of base brown for the actual soil itself. Now, I've seen so many different styles of basing with these Blood Bowl miniatures, but I'm essentially going to go for a sort of traditional grass, and that's it really. So I'm not going to highlight this brown at all. I'm just sticking the Rhinox hide straight over the bottom of the whole base, and then all I'm going to do is add a flock over the top. Before I do get to that flocking stage though, I do want to paint the actual rim of the base. I've gone with black again. I'm using contrast black Templar because that's what I had to hand. It might be easy just to use a base black paint, or any sort of black paint really, and a lot quicker. But you know, you can see now the contrast paint works just as well around these bases as anywhere else. One thing I will note is that you do need to put a couple of coats down for this one to get that nice sort of black matte feel around the actual basing. To actually put some of the grass on the base, I've just got a little bit of static grass, as you can see here. I'm not using a static grass applicator. I didn't want it all to look uniformed and straight. I wanted it to look a little bit messy, so all I've done is grab some tweezers and just throw it all on the base, essentially all onto that PVA glue there, and it starts to look really good. As you can see with the finished miniatures here, you can see the stripes work quite well. I think you know, I might have gone with a lighter grey or a white just to make them stand out a little bit more maybe, but to give it that little bit of a grim dark feel, you know, that dirty fantasy feel, I think the grey does work a lot better than a bright white would have done. I really like how the quills turned out. That was, you know, both of those have been used with the same sort of that Druchii Violet or Druchii Violet or however you want to pronounce that. I think they work really nicely, and they look really good because I think they stand out a lot more. The red looks great as well, a really nice bright colour to add some interest to the actual minis. I think it works great obviously with the red card that the elf's showing there, and the book looks absolutely fantastic. I think if we'd gone with browns and sort of muted colours, I don't think it would have worked too well. I think Blood Bowl and this fantasy football is all about fancy, it's all about these bright colours. But thanks for watching guys, I really do hope you liked the video. Make sure you do hang around as well, hit that subscribe button because I've got loads of more Blood Bowl videos coming your way, and if you've got time, go and check out the channel as well. There's lots of other painting videos on there already. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.